Ethan's fingers tightened around the cup of tea, the warmth seeping into his frozen skin. He barely remembered what it felt like to hold something warm. Steam curled into the frigid morning air as he took a hesitant sip, the liquid scalding his tongue but filling his chest with a fleeting comfort. Margot watched him carefully, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Come inside when you're done," she said before turning and disappearing back into the cafe. Ethan hesitated. People didn't just offer kindness for no reason. There was always a catch. Still, the promise of more food and warmth was too strong to ignore. He cast a glance at Cooper, who looked up at him expectantly, tail wagging just the slightest bit. "Guess we're working today, buddy," Ethan murmured, then took a final sip of tea before standing up. The bell above the cafe door jingled as he stepped inside, Cooper following close behind. The scent of fresh bread and coffee wrapped around him, making his empty stomach twist painfully. The place was small but cozy, with mismatched chairs and tables that looked well-worn and welcoming. A few early customers sat near the windows, lost in quiet conversations or newspapers. Margot stood behind the counter, kneading dough with practiced efficiency. She nodded toward the sink. "Wash up, then you can start by sweeping." Ethan hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone had given him directions that weren't shouted in anger, but he obeyed, rolling up his sleeves and scrubbing his hands clean before grabbing a broom from the corner. For the next few hours, he worked in silence, sweeping, wiping down tables, and stacking plates. Cooper curled up in a warm corner near the ovens, occasionally lifting his head when Ethan walked by. The cafe wasn't busy, but it was steady, and with every passing moment, Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Stability. By midday, Margot slid a plate in front of him, piled high with scrambled eggs and toast. "Eat," she said simply, "then tell me your story." Ethan's hands shook as he picked up the fork. He hadn't had a real meal in longer than he could remember. He hesitated only a moment before digging in, the first bite nearly bringing tears to his eyes. It was warm, buttery, real. Margot sat across from him, sipping her coffee. She didn't push him to talk right away, just waited. When his plate was nearly empty, Ethan finally sighed and leaned back. "There's not much to tell," he admitted. "I left home. Been on my own for a while." Margot raised an eyebrow. "And your family?" Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't want to talk about them, about the nights filled with shouting, the doors slammed in his face, the feeling of never being wanted. Instead, he shrugged. "They won't miss me." Margot didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. "And Cooper?" she asked instead, nodding toward the dog. Ethan glanced at the German Shepherd, who was now lazily gnawing on a scrap of bread Margot had tossed him earlier. "Found him," he said, "or maybe he found me." Margot hummed, tapping her fingers against her cup. "He's well trained. Someone's probably looking for him." Ethan stiffened. The thought had crossed his mind, of course. A dog like Cooper didn't just wander the streets his whole life, but the idea of losing the one thing that had kept him warm, that had stayed by his side, made his chest ache. "No one's come looking," he muttered, "and I'm not letting anyone take him." Margot studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, you can stay. Work for your food and for Cooper's too." Ethan's head snapped up. "Seriously?" She shrugged. "I could use the help, and you could use a place that isn't an alleyway." A lump formed in Ethan's throat, but he forced it down. He wasn't sure why she was helping him, but for once, he wasn't going to question good luck. He nodded. "Okay." The days turned into a week. Ethan settled into a rhythm. Cleaning, helping around the cafe, even learning how to make coffee under Margot's strict guidance. Cooper stayed by his side, and customers took a liking to him, often slipping him bits of food. Ethan wasn't sure what to call this feeling that bloomed in his chest. Safety? Belonging? He wasn't ready to name it yet, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to let it go. Then, everything shattered. It started with a flyer. Ethan had just finished taking out the trash when he saw it taped to a lamppost. His heart stopped. A picture of Cooper, the same intelligent amber eyes staring back at him. And below it, bold letters. "Missing dog. Reward offered." Ethan's stomach twisted. He read the details in a blur. Cooper's real name was Rex. He belonged to a family in the next town over. They had been searching for him for weeks. A cold weight settled over him. He should have known this wouldn't last. That night, he couldn't sleep. Cooper rested beside him as always, unaware of the storm raging in Ethan's mind. He should return him. It was the right thing to do, but the thought of losing Cooper felt unbearable. Would they treat him well? Would they keep him warm, feed him, love him? Could Ethan really be selfish enough to keep him? Morning came too soon. Ethan dragged himself to the cafe, barely meeting Margot's eyes. She said nothing at first, but as the day went on, she finally spoke. "You saw the flyer." Ethan stiffened. "Yeah." Margot sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "You have to take him home, Ethan." He swallowed hard. What if he doesn't want to go? Margot gave him a long, sad look. "It's not about what you want. It's about what's right." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say that he needed Cooper just as much as the family who lost him, but deep down he knew she was right. That evening, he walked Cooper to the address on the flyer. Each step felt heavier than the last. When they arrived, a little girl stood in the yard, her eyes wide as she spotted them. "Rex?" Cooper perked up, his tail wagged, his ears lifting at the familiar voice. The girl ran forward, calling his name, and in that moment, Ethan knew. Cooper remembered. Tears pricked his eyes as he knelt down, running a hand through the dog's fur one last time. "Go on, buddy," he whispered. Cooper hesitated, looking between Ethan and the girl. Then, with a soft whine, he trotted forward, tail wagging as he was enveloped in hugs. Ethan turned before they could see his face, stuffing his hands into his pockets as he walked away. His chest ached, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something else too, pride. He had done the right thing. The next morning, he showed up at the cafe, expecting to feel empty. Instead, Margot handed him an apron without a word. "You did good, kid," she said softly. Ethan blinked back, the tears threatening to fall, and nodded. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought.